For most of Hollywood's history, theaters were the beating heart of the entertainment business. If you rewind to the early and mid 1900s, the big studios, Paramount, Warner Bros., MGM, Universal, and 20th Century Fox, weren't just making films. They were controlling the entire system from top to bottom. This was what insiders called vertical integration. A studio didn't just finance and produce a film, it also distributed it and made sure it was shown in theaters it already owned. That meant Hollywood wasn't just shaping the art of cinema, it was dictating the very experience of how and where people consumed it. If you were a moviegoer in those decades, your choices were limited. You'd walk into your local cinema, and the films available on the marquee weren't based on public demand, but on studio contracts. Studios pushed their own productions and kept out competitors whenever it suited them. Theaters became exclusive pipelines for the major studios, locking in profits and locking out challengers. In other words, controlling theaters meant controlling Hollywood itself. That stranglehold lasted until 1948, when everything changed with a landmark Supreme Court ruling, United States vs. Paramount Pictures, Inc. The government accused the studios of running an illegal monopoly, and the court agreed. The ruling forced studios to divest their theater chains, shattering their direct grip on distribution. From that point forward, studios could no longer block competitors or guarantee their films screen time just because they owned the building. But even with that legal barrier in place, the cultural and financial dominance of theaters remained unshaken. Success was still measured in ticket sales, and box office numbers became the currency of Hollywood prestige. Decade after decade, the formula didn't really change. Studios poured hundreds of millions into productions, gambled on opening weekends, and measured success by how much money audiences were willing to pay at the box office. Even as television rose, VHS tapes circulated, and DVDs filled living rooms, theaters remained the final word in legitimacy. Winning at the box office meant you were truly winning in Hollywood. And then came Netflix. At first, no one saw them as a threat. They were a DVD by mail company that seemed like a quirky alternative to Blockbuster, not a future empire. But Netflix had no interest in theaters from the very beginning. Instead of trying to claw its way into that arena, it skipped it entirely. The company's founders saw something the old studios didn't. Theaters weren't the future. They were a limitation. Why compete for limited seats, restricted showtimes, and a model dependent on people leaving their homes when you could deliver content directly to millions of screens across the world? Netflix started small, focusing on convenience. But that decision, to bypass theaters altogether, was the first step toward dismantling Hollywood's monopoly on prestige and power. By the time Netflix moved into streaming in 2007, the company had already separated itself from the traditional Hollywood playbook. It wasn't chasing box office numbers. It wasn't paying for theatrical distribution deals. It wasn't subject to the whims of theater owners or the restrictions of release windows. Netflix created a direct relationship with its audience, something no Hollywood studio had ever fully accomplished. This was the death of the theater monopoly. Not because theaters ceased to exist, but because they ceased to be essential. For the first time in history, a company proved you could dominate the entertainment industry without putting a single film on the silver screen. Netflix turned the movie theater from the pinnacle of success into an optional step, and eventually, into a side note. In many ways, this was even more revolutionary than the 1948 Paramount ruling. The court forced studios to give up theaters, but Netflix made theaters irrelevant altogether. It showed the world that owning screens didn't matter anymore. What mattered was owning attention, and Netflix had found the blueprint for capturing it. For decades, Hollywood relied on layers of middlemen to reach audiences. A studio produced the film, handed it over to distributors, who then negotiated with theater chains to secure screens. Viewers had to buy tickets, travel to the cinema, and experience the story on someone else's schedule. The entire system depended on physical infrastructure and gatekeepers. That was the Hollywood way. Netflix looked at this model and asked a radical question. What if the middlemen weren't needed? What if you could deliver entertainment directly into people's homes, cutting out distributors, cutting out theaters, and building a direct relationship with the audience? That question became the foundation of Netflix's direct-to-consumer strategy. When Netflix shifted to streaming in 2007, it wasn't just offering convenience. It was rewriting the very relationship between storyteller and audience. For the first time, a global company had the ability to place a vast library of films and shows in front of millions of viewers without relying on ticket sales or TV broadcasters. Instead of begging theaters for screen space, Netflix became its own distribution channel. This direct model came with a massive advantage: freedom. The company didn't have to wait months for a theatrical release window to close before offering content. It didn't have to bargain with TV networks for scheduling slots. When Netflix wanted to release something, it pressed a button, and the show or movie was instantly available to subscribers around the world. That speed and simplicity made Hollywood's traditional system look outdated and slow. More importantly, direct-to-consumer meant control. Netflix owned the customer relationship. It knew who subscribed, how often they watched, and what they preferred. Hollywood studios rarely had that level of insight. They depended on box office tallies or third-party Nielsen ratings that offered broad estimates at best. Netflix, by contrast, had a living, breathing audience base at its fingertips. This control also changed the economics of entertainment. In theaters, studios needed massive marketing campaigns to convince people to leave their homes and buy a ticket. Success or failure was determined by opening weekend. With Netflix, the pressure of opening night vanished. Shows and films didn't have to prove themselves in a single weekend. They could slowly build audiences over time because the platform was always available. A film that might have bombed at the box office could quietly thrive on Netflix for years. The direct-to-consumer model also gave Netflix a recurring revenue stream that Hollywood envied. Instead of relying on unpredictable box office spikes, Netflix collected monthly subscriptions. Whether you watched one film or 100 episodes in a month, you paid the same fee. That steady income allowed Netflix to plan further ahead and invest billions into new content, knowing it had a reliable flow of cash. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of this model was trust. By bypassing theaters, Netflix positioned itself as an entertainment companion rather than a once-in-a-while destination. It was always there, waiting on your TV, laptop, or phone. You didn't have to plan an outing or wait for showtimes. Entertainment became personal, private, and on demand. That intimacy built loyalty, something theaters could never match. In short, Netflix's direct-to-consumer approach dismantled Hollywood's dependency on middlemen. It removed barriers, gave Netflix control over distribution, and created a new kind of relationship with audiences, one that was constant, global, and built for the digital age. If there's one ingredient that truly separates Netflix from Hollywood, it's data. Traditional studios relied on box office numbers and TV ratings to guess what people wanted. They could measure sales or viewership, but they had no idea how audiences actually behaved in the moment. Once a film was released, the only feedback came in the form of sales figures and critic reviews. Netflix rewrote that script. Every time someone pressed play, paused, fast-forwarded, or binged an entire season in one night, Netflix collected that information. Over time, it built one of the most detailed data sets in the history of entertainment. And it used that knowledge not just to analyze success, but to design it. Think about what that means. While Hollywood executives sat in boardrooms debating creative instincts, Netflix already knew what viewers loved. It knew that people who watched political documentaries were likely to enjoy a political drama like House of Cards. It knew that fans of British crime series might binge something like Peaky Blinders and then crave similar content. By connecting these dots, Netflix reduced the guesswork that had haunted Hollywood for decades. This data-first approach transformed content creation. Netflix didn't greenlight shows because an executive had a feeling. It greenlit shows because the numbers said there was an audience waiting. That's how House of Cards was born. Before spending $100 million on the series, Netflix knew its subscribers loved Kevin Spacey films, political dramas, and David Fincher's directing style. It was a calculated bet based on hard data, not a risky gamble based on intuition. The power of data went beyond greenlighting shows. Netflix could also tailor marketing campaigns to specific audiences. Instead of one-size-fits-all trailers, it tested multiple thumbnails and promos. If you liked thrillers, you might see a darker image promoting the same show. If you lean toward romance, your promo might highlight a love subplot. By customizing marketing at the individual level, Netflix increased engagement and made its library feel personally curated. Data also shaped the platform's most famous feature, recommendations. Over 80% of what people watch on Netflix comes from suggestions made by its algorithm. That's not just convenience, it's control. By guiding viewers towards specific content, Netflix ensures that no film or show gets buried the way it might in theaters or on cable. Everything has a chance to find its audience because the algorithm is always connecting content to the right person. Even more revolutionary, data redefined the meaning of success. Hollywood depended on box office weekends, but Netflix measured watch time, rewatch rates, and subscriber growth. A show didn't need to draw millions of dollars in ticket sales to be considered a hit. It just needed to keep people watching, and more importantly, keep them paying for another month. This changed the types of stories that could thrive. Niche genres, foreign dramas, and experimental formats that Hollywood might have rejected could find massive success on Netflix if the data supported them. At its core, data gave Netflix an advantage Hollywood could never fully match. Studios could produce blockbusters, but they didn't know their audience as intimately. Netflix turned entertainment into a science where success wasn't just hoped for, it was engineered. When Netflix first launched House of Cards in 2013, it shocked the entertainment industry. Until then, Netflix had mostly been known as a streaming library, a place where you could rewatch your favorite films and shows. But suddenly, Netflix wasn't just licensing content, it was creating it. And not just any content. House of Cards was a big-budget, star-studded political drama featuring Kevin Spacey and directed by David Fincher. It looked and felt like a premium cable series, but it lived only on Netflix. That move was more than just an experiment. It was a statement of intent. Netflix was declaring that it was no longer a middleman. It was a studio in its own right. Traditional Hollywood measured success with box office sales and Nielsen TV ratings. Netflix flipped the metric. Its true measure of success was whether people subscribed and stayed subscribed. The old system focused on short-term spikes in revenue. Netflix cared about long-term loyalty. After House of Cards came Orange is the New Black, Narcos, and later global sensations like The Crown, Money Heist, and Stranger Things. Each of these shows proved Netflix wasn't just dabbling in original content. It was building a vast library of exclusives that couldn't be found anywhere else. And the more exclusive content Netflix offered, the less dependent it became on Hollywood studios. Instead of paying high licensing fees, it was creating its own intellectual property. And with every new original hit, Netflix made it harder for subscribers to cancel because they couldn't get those shows on cable or at the movies. This was the second phase of domination, original content as a weapon. While Hollywood studios still relied on theaters for massive revenue spikes, Netflix quietly built a fortress of shows and films that kept audiences locked in month after month. In this model, one great show wasn't just entertainment. It was a subscription magnet, a long-term business strategy disguised as storytelling. Perhaps one of the boldest shifts Netflix introduced was the binge-watching revolution. In traditional Hollywood, content was released slowly. Television shows aired once a week. Big films opened in theaters, then disappeared, then returned months later on VHS, DVD, or digital platforms. Every stage was carefully designed to squeeze as much money as possible from each release window. Netflix ignored that playbook. When it dropped House of Cards, the entire season arrived at once. For audiences, it was addictive. For the industry, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, instead of waiting week to week, viewers could consume an entire story in a single weekend. What used to take months of scheduling now took hours of commitment. This binge model changed more than just viewing habits. It changed culture. Shows no longer grew slowly through word of mouth. They exploded overnight. Think of Stranger Things. Within days of release, it wasn't just a show, it was a cultural event. Social media amplified the binge model even further. Fans around the world consumed content at the same pace, creating global conversations in real time. Hollywood, with its staggered releases and delayed rollouts, couldn't compete with that level of cultural velocity. For Netflix, binge releases also had a hidden business advantage. They kept people glued to the platform for long stretches of time, building habits and reducing cancellations. A subscriber who just spent 10 hours with a new show wasn't likely to cancel their membership right after. The binge became a retention tool, not just an entertainment choice. Traditional networks tried to adapt, but many were locked into old revenue models, dependent on ad sales and weekly engagement. Netflix, free from commercials, didn't care about pacing. It only cared about making the platform irresistible. By turning binge watching into a global phenomenon, Netflix reshaped not just how we watch, but how we think about storytelling itself. One of Netflix's boldest strategies came with its global expansion. For decades, Hollywood had treated international markets as secondary. Films were made for American theaters first and then sold abroad months later. International distribution was fragmented, often relying on local partners and middlemen. Netflix shattered that tradition by launching its platform in over 190 countries. Suddenly, a series made in Spain like Money Heist wasn't just a local hit. It became a worldwide obsession, with fans in Asia, North America, and South America binging it simultaneously. Korean dramas like Squid Game went from niche genre pieces to global mega hits. In fact, Squid Game became Netflix's most watched series of all time, proving that subtitles were no longer a barrier when the story was gripping enough. This global-first strategy gave Netflix two massive advantages. First, it tapped into an almost unlimited pool of creative talent. By investing in local productions, Netflix wasn't just importing content from the US, it was making content everywhere. That meant stories rooted in unique cultures and perspectives could reach a worldwide audience instantly. Second, it created brand loyalty in regions where Hollywood had barely scratched the surface. In countries where going to theaters was expensive or limited, Netflix became the main gateway to premium entertainment. Hollywood studios had always measured dominance by their box office returns, especially in international markets. But Netflix measured dominance in subscriptions. Every new country added millions of potential members. And the more those members found shows that spoke their language, the harder it became to cancel. By treating the entire world as its audience, Netflix didn't just compete with Hollywood, it became bigger than Hollywood. For the first time, stories made outside the US were shaping global pop culture on the same scale as American blockbusters. That wasn't just expansion, that was transformation. For decades, Hollywood defined a hit in one way: ticket sales. A film's worth was judged by its opening weekend box office. Studios waited nervously for Friday night numbers to roll in, knowing that those first few days could determine the fate of an entire production. A strong opening meant glory. A weak one meant failure, no matter how beloved the film might become over time. Netflix demolished that narrow definition. On its platform, success isn't measured in dollars earned at the box office. There is no box office. Instead, success is measured in attention. How many people watched a show? How long did they stay engaged? Did they finish a season in a single weekend? Did it inspire people to keep their subscriptions active for another month? These were the new markers of success, and they were far more aligned with modern viewing habits than Hollywood's outdated obsession with ticket sales. This shift meant that shows once considered too risky for theaters could thrive on Netflix. A slow-burn drama without explosions or superheroes might fail on the big screen, but on Netflix, it could build a loyal following across multiple countries. A quirky foreign language series could never dominate US theaters, but on Netflix, it could explode into a global hit because it wasn't judged by opening night. It was judged by how much people cared. Take Squid Game. In Hollywood terms, a subtitled Korean survival drama would have been a niche release, unlikely to headline American theaters. But Netflix redefined the metric. Squid Game became the most watched series in the platform's history because millions of people binged it, discussed it online, and kept their subscriptions active just to be part of the phenomenon. That's success in the Netflix era. By changing what it meant to have a hit, Netflix gave storytellers more freedom. Creators no longer had to tailor their visions to box office expectations. They could make unique, experimental, or culturally specific stories, knowing that Netflix measured value not in dollars per ticket, but in hours of engagement. It was a new scoreboard. and Netflix was the one holding it. While Hollywood's power once rested in physical theaters, Netflix's power rests in invisible infrastructure. Streaming might look effortless on the surface. Press play and the show begins. But behind that button is one of the most advanced digital systems ever built. Netflix has spent billions building servers, optimizing video quality, and ensuring that no matter where you are in the world, you can access its library seamlessly. This infrastructure investment gave Netflix a massive advantage. Traditional studios had no direct delivery system. They made films, shipped them to theaters, or sold them to networks. Netflix, by contrast, built its own highway. It owned the road, the vehicles, and the fuel. That control meant reliability. Whether you were watching on a smart TV in Los Angeles, a phone in Mumbai, or a laptop in Nairobi, Netflix delivered the same smooth experience. Accessibility was another key factor. Hollywood's system demanded that audiences adjust their lives around theaters. Showtimes, locations, and ticket prices dictated when and how you could watch. Netflix erased those barriers. All you needed was a device and an internet connection. Suddenly, entertainment became something you could carry in your pocket. Waiting for a bus, sitting in bed, or traveling on a plane, Netflix followed you everywhere. The platform also adapted to local realities. It invested heavily in compression technology so that even in countries with slower internet, shows could still stream without constant buffering. This technical mastery wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. By making high-quality streaming available to millions of people who might not have had access otherwise, Netflix expanded its reach far beyond Hollywood's traditional markets. In the end, Netflix's true dominance wasn't just about its shows. It was about its ability to deliver those shows anytime, anywhere. Its infrastructure made theaters look limited, almost outdated. Where Hollywood relied on buildings with screens, Netflix turned every screen into a theater. Netflix's rise also triggered one of the fiercest battles in modern entertainment, the streaming wars. For years, Netflix had the field largely to itself, but as its subscriber numbers soared and its original content grabbed headlines, Hollywood studios realized they could no longer ignore the digital revolution. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be Netflix. Disney launched Disney Plus, bringing with it the full power of Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar. Warner Bros. Created HBO Max. NBC Universal rolled out Peacock. Paramount developed Paramount Plus. Even Amazon and Apple entered the ring, pouring billions into their platforms. The old guard of Hollywood, once content with theater tickets and cable deals, had declared war in the digital arena. This competition reshaped the industry. Each company pulled its licensed content back from Netflix to strengthen its own service. Friends, The Office, Marvel films, shows and movies that had once fueled Netflix's library were reclaimed. Hollywood was no longer feeding Netflix. It was fighting against it. But Netflix had a head start. It had already built the infrastructure, perfected the recommendation algorithms, and invested in original content long before its rivals took streaming seriously. While competitors scrambled to catch up, Netflix continued to expand globally, doubling down on non-English language shows and cementing itself as the platform for diverse, international storytelling. The streaming wars weren't just about content. They were about survival. As cable subscriptions declined and theater attendance wavered, streaming became the new battlefield for dominance. For viewers, this meant endless choices. For Netflix, it meant holding its ground as the pioneer in a market now crowded with giants. Even today, as competition intensifies, Netflix's brand remains synonymous with streaming itself. Just as people once said they were going to the movies, now they say they're going to Netflix something. That cultural shorthand is perhaps the clearest sign of victory in the streaming wars. Finally, perhaps the most profound shift Netflix achieved was cultural. In the old days, Hollywood controlled the global narrative. American films dominated box offices around the world, and US stock culture spread with them. Foreign language films rarely broke through internationally, and when they did, it was considered an exception, not the rule. Netflix erased those boundaries. A Spanish heist drama like Money Heist became a worldwide sensation. A German sci-fi series like Dark developed a global cult following. Squid Game didn't just succeed in Korea, it became a cultural touchstone everywhere. For the first time, the global entertainment conversation wasn't dictated solely by Hollywood. It was shaped by voices from every corner of the world. This cultural impact extended beyond entertainment. Shows sparked fashion trends, internet memes, and even political discussions. When millions of people around the world are watching the same series at the same time, culture shifts. Theaters could never achieve that kind of simultaneous global reach. Netflix also broke down the stigma around subtitled and dubbed content. Audiences who might have once avoided foreign films embraced them when they arrived in binge-ready seasons on their home screens. Instead of Hollywood exporting culture to the world was now exporting culture to Hollywood. By dominating culture itself, Netflix achieved something theaters never could. It made entertainment borderless, immediate, and shared on a global scale. In the process, it didn't just compete with Hollywood, it redefined it. Do you want me to now also combine all these sections, 1 to 10, into one continuous full-length YouTube script so you'll have a polished, ready-to-record version?